Welcome to States of Justice, where true stories from the heart of American law enforcement reveal the thin line between power and principle. There are moments when arrogance meets accountability, when the badge meant to protect becomes the mirror that exposes corruption. Tonight's story is one of those moments when a racist officer tried to threaten a black driver, not knowing that the man behind the wheel was the newly appointed police commissioner. It's a story about prejudice meeting its reckoning and integrity standing tall in silence. On an early autumn evening, the city of Raleigh was quiet. Streetlights flickered across damp pavement after a light rain, and the rhythm of sirens in the distance told a story the city had heard too many times before. A story of power, fear, and control. But that night, something different was about to unfold. Driving through the calm streets was Commissioner Marcus Hale, the man who had recently taken the highest seat in the city's police department. For 25 years, he had worn the badge with pride. He had started as a patrolman, working the toughest beats, facing both danger and discrimination, yet always holding fast to one belief, that justice must never depend on who you are or the color of your skin. Marcus Hale was known for his quiet authority. He spoke little, but every decision he made carried weight. Colleagues described him as incorruptible, a man whose sense of duty came not from ambition, but from purpose. He had risen through the ranks not by politics, but by integrity. And as the newly appointed commissioner, he carried with him a mission to rebuild public trust and root out corruption from within. But one officer had no idea who Marcus Hale was that night. Officer Daniel Reed had worn his badge for 15 years. To some, he was the image of confidence and authority. To others, particularly those he pulled over, he was the face of intimidation and prejudice. Reed had a history of targeting drivers of color, stopping them without cause, justifying it with vague excuses and empty paperwork. Complaints had been filed against him, but they never stuck. In every report, there was always a loophole, a missing detail, a superior willing to sign off. He had learned how to operate in the gray zone, and in his mind, that made him untouchable. On that cool evening, he was about to learn how wrong he was. A black sedan rolled slowly through a yellow light on Jefferson Avenue. Reed, sitting in his cruiser nearby, noticed the car, not because of the traffic violation, but because of the man behind the wheel. A middle-aged black man in a suit driving calmly, alone. It was all the excuse Reed needed. The flashing lights came alive behind Marcus Hale's car. He eased to a stop, his expression calm but knowing. He had seen this before, not as commissioner, not even as a senior officer, but as a man who had lived his entire life being judged first and respected later. Officer Reed stepped out of his cruiser with heavy steps and a louder presence than necessary. He adjusted his belt, squared his shoulders, and approached the vehicle with that familiar arrogance, the kind built over years of unchecked authority. He barked orders as if speaking to a criminal. He demanded identification with an attitude that reeked of superiority, not service. His words were sharp, his tone designed to provoke. Marcus Hale, however, did not flinch. He moved with deliberate calm, lowering his window, keeping his hands visible, saying nothing. Reed misread that silence as submission. He believed he had control. He lectured, accused, and assumed. He warned the driver that people like him needed to learn respect for the law. What he didn't realize was that the man before him was the law. Not the kind that hides behind a badge, but the kind that defines it. As the encounter continued, Reed became more aggressive. He circled the vehicle, questioned the car's ownership, and threatened arrest over fabricated reasons. Everything he did was recorded on his body camera, a detail that in that moment he had forgotten. Then, Marcus Hale reached slowly into his jacket and handed over his identification. It was not a driver's license. It was a commissioner's badge. Officer Reed froze. The arrogance drained from his face as he read the name printed clearly in gold. Marcus J. Hale, Police Commissioner, City of Raleigh. His mouth went dry. His posture collapsed into something unfamiliar: humility. The silence that followed was deafening. Every word he had said, every action he had taken, now echoed back in his mind. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. He hadn't just harassed a civilian. He had profiled, threatened, and disrespected the highest-ranking officer in his department. For a long moment, no one spoke. Marcus Hale looked at him with calm authority, not anger. He didn't raise his voice or return the insult. Instead, he simply asked for the officer's name and badge number. His tone remained even, professional, and restrained. Reed's hands trembled as he complied. In his chest, panic began to rise. The power dynamic had flipped completely. The same arrogance that once shielded him now exposed him. When Hale drove away, he didn't look back. He knew the real work was about to begin. By morning, Internal Affairs had the body camera footage. Within 48 hours, an investigation was underway. Every minute of that stop was analyzed. The evidence spoke for itself. The tone, the threats, the profiling, all laid bare on record. But that wasn't the end. As investigators dug deeper, more cases surfaced. Stops that mirrored the same behavior. Reports that had been dismissed. Complaints that were quietly closed. A pattern emerged, one that revealed years of misconduct buried under bureaucracy and silence. The department had no choice but to act. Officer Reed was suspended, then terminated after a formal hearing. But his case became more than a disciplinary matter. It became a catalyst for change. Commissioner Hale refused to let the incident fade into another forgotten controversy. He turned it into a turning point. He initiated mandatory bias and ethics training for all officers. He restructured the complaint review system to ensure every citizen report was reviewed independently. Body camera footage became mandatory in all citizen interactions and was cross-checked regularly by oversight teams. But most importantly, Hale began speaking publicly, not about the humiliation he endured, but about the responsibility that comes with power. He reminded his department that a badge is not armor against accountability. It's a promise to uphold justice without prejudice. His quiet dignity became an example, one that reached far beyond the walls of his precinct. The story of that night spread through the department, whispered first, then spoken openly. Officers who once looked up to men like Reed began to look inward. And in that self-reflection, change began, not from orders, but from conscience. Months later, the department had transformed. The reforms Commissioner Hale introduced reshaped the culture from within. New recruits were trained not just in procedure, but in empathy. Senior officers were required to undergo leadership audits to assess how they used their authority. Community relations improved. Trust began to return, slowly but surely. For the first time in years, citizens felt seen, not watched. Hale never mentioned that night again in public, but those close to him said it changed him. It reminded him why he had taken the oath all those years ago, not for the title, not for recognition, but for justice. He understood that true authority is measured not by how loudly one commands, but by how quietly one serves. The man who had been profiled turned that pain into purpose, proving that the fight for justice is not waged with anger, but with integrity. And in the years that followed, his leadership became a model for departments across the nation. A reminder that one act of courage, one moment of restraint, can rewrite the story of an entire institution. If this story moved you, show your support by liking this video and subscribing to States of Justice. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Because stories like this remind us that integrity is not a slogan on a badge. It's the heart of justice itself.